Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this session where we will be brainstorming with you on how to empower global health innovation in the EU. So on behalf of DSW, I'm very pleased to welcome you this morning. I'm here with my colleague Agustin Martin, who will be helping us to get a feeling of the audience also online, the questions on the chat. So remember, you do have a chat with Q&A if you're following us online. If you're here, you will be privileged because we will have also a dedicated time for you to give us your comments, reactions, and questions. So what will happen right now is that I hope you all grab a coffee or a tea and have full energy to follow this conversation, but then really reacting to this and tell us what we could do better. I'm going to give a very short introduction based on a pool incentive study that we recently did at DSW. And I wanted to keep it as short as possible because soon after that, I will call our great speakers to join me here and to share their own experiences from different angles. And right after that, we will open the floor to hear from you. So, this should be going into the next slide. Okay. Our focus on global health innovations at DSW is on neglected diseases. And what are neglected diseases? These are a diverse group of communicable diseases. You may have heard about a few of them, like malaria, dengue fever, leprosy. There are some that you may have never heard about, like schistosomiasis or filariasis, except if you're working actively in this field. And why are they called neglected? Because there is a big gap. So for most of these diseases, there are no available vaccines, therapies that are effective, or diagnostic tools to help us address this burden. And why is that so? Basically, because as you see in this map, these diseases affect predominantly people living in low and middle income countries. So you can see the darker areas in the map. And this means that because the ability to pay of people living in these countries, their own governments, their insurance systems is very limited, then there is very little incentives for the R&D in this area. So now, you could ask the question, why we should care in the EU about this? And why should we be discussing this in Gastein today? And there is a big reason. I just show you, the darker areas, that big burden, mainly in low and middle income countries. But we are overall talking about more than 2 billion people affected by these diseases as a whole. So that's a big reason, I will say, big enough for the EU and for us to do something about it. But there are other reasons as well. Because of other ongoing crises, for instance, climate change, but also conflicts in many areas, and also emerging pandemics and other epidemics, the situation is actually becoming worse and worse. Again, the heavy burden is still in low and middle income countries. However, for some of these diseases, and you will hear a bit more about this, but you can see the examples with these mosquito-borne diseases. Some of them are spreading into other geographies where there were maybe in the past and they were eradicated or eliminated, and they are coming again, including to Europe. So some of the diseases like dengue, Zika, chikungunya, the vectors that are the key means for transmission of these diseases are already here. So that's a big second reason for us to care about this and to think about this and to come up with solutions. If you want another big reason, there's also positive spillovers from R&D in neglected diseases in other areas, such as global health security. So in fact, during COVID-19, many projects that were working on neglected diseases R&D were rapidly deployed and helped to build the tools for COVID-19 that we got fairly rapidly. So after all this dooming or glooming picture that I have given to you, I think there's time for a bit of good news. The good news is that the EU is actually a big contributor. The EU has been doing a lot so far. And here we just show you a few examples. The main contributions of the EU over the past decades have been through the program, the Horizon program, the Horizon Europe, and the predecessor Horizon 2020, so the research and innovation programs. And mainly through a partnership, a very special one called European and Developing Countries Clinical Trials Partnership, or EDCTP by its acronym. And you can see that there are some results. For instance, one very big innovation that came recently were two vaccines against malaria. So these are the very first vaccines against this very tricky disease. Also from a scientific point of view, was very difficult to get this developed. They are not perfect, they are far from perfect, but they are one really important tool in the fight against this disease. And these receive contributions from the EU via its EDCTP partnership. So you'll see them, I think, they are 21 and they are TSS vaccines, if I got it right, Agustin. So the EU has been doing a lot, but majoritarily or almost exclusively, the funding from the EU has been what we call push funding. So push funding, if you want in a simple word, are mainly grants. And those grants are pushing these products, sorry, I have to be a bit graphic, they are pushing these products in the pipeline, in the very first phases of R&D. So we call them push because they do this. That's not enough, because that pipeline, those phases of R&D are very long and tend to be very costly, especially towards the end. So this is why at DSW we also recently, we were hearing from developers, these are our partners too, and we continuously talk to them. And we recently did a study in which we actually consulted with over 30 stakeholders, including developers. We asked them, what are the drivers and what are the obstacles that you have in the development of products in this area? And one big obstacle that they all identified was the absence of pool incentives. So at EU level, there are no pool incentives in this area. So what we did was basically we tried to identify existing pool incentives in other countries, what was out there, what has been also proposed by academia, by scholars, and we assess them. And we assess them in two ways. We ask, are these mechanisms effective to bring about research and development in the neglected disease field? Are they fair? I mean, the type of questions about the mechanisms themselves, how they rank. And then we ask a second set of questions. Are these mechanisms feasible to be implemented in the EU? Can they be politically, from a political point of view, financial point of view, legal point of view, possible in the EU? So we came up with a long list, and at the end, some of these mechanisms were very good, were very effective, but maybe not feasible, and the other way around. Among the things that we found is that there is a program in the US called Priority Review Voucher, nothing to do with the transferable exclusivity voucher, because in this case, the voucher gives the right to the developer to have a priority review. The equivalent will be accelerated assessment in the EU. And this developer can use it for another product or can sell it in the market. So we found that this mechanism, an equivalent of this mechanism in the EU could be a good option. Now you see something interesting at the bottom of this slide, which is some of the phases, the R&D phases. Each of the pull mechanisms that we identified and assessed are better at pooling those products in certain phases of the R&D process. And for instance, the PRV, the priority review vouchers, are particularly good in the latest phases of development. We also identify, among the other, like potential mechanisms at EU level, milestone prices, which can be good also to do this pooling effect, so rewarding the outputs at the end and providing a viable market for the products. And finally, we also identify innovation hubs. So that could be, for instance, taking the EDCTP, which exists, so existing frameworks in the EU, and transforming them into a mechanism that can address the obstacles that developers are facing in this area. So my final message would be, in our study, we found that, of course, for these products to go along the whole pipeline, they will need a combination of push incentives and pull incentives mechanisms. There are no pull incentives mechanisms right now in the EU, and this leads the EU to have the problem of investing a lot in research, but not necessarily getting all the products to the market, and more importantly, to the patients that need these products. So there's a big need to do something, and there's a big opportunity right now. There are many open. I'll mention a few, but you will hear more from HERA, for instance. You will hear more probably during the panel discussions about the discussions on the pharmaceutical legislation revision, which provides another opening for creating a pull incentive mechanisms. And there are other processes that are more long-term, like the next framework program, the FP10, that is being discussed right now. So without further ado, that was my short introduction to the topic. I would like now to ask our speakers to come and join me in these beautiful chairs that the organizers have prepared, and to share with us your experiences. So please, I've maintained, but you can sit whenever, and I will ask first Ilona, and then Joel, then Olivier, and then Maria. Oh yes, Maya, please. Yeah, perfect. Okay, we are very pleased to have you all today. I would like to start very quickly. I'm not going to give very long introductions because I think also our speakers don't need them and can tell us a little bit more about themselves. We have here Professor Ilona Kickbush, and she's the founder, as far as I know, of the Global Health Institute, the Global Health Institute at the Graduate Center in Geneva. And we are very pleased to have you here, and I mess it up, but could you provide us a quick reaction, your takeaway, or your opening statement, please, Ilona?
Well, you asked me to put this in a larger global context, and that's what I'll try and do, and thank you very much for this invitation. I think, we are starting out from a situation where, as you indicated, the whole term neglected diseases is probably going to go down the drain, because obviously they are neglected diseases because they are geographically focused, where you have indicated. And of course, the more it comes our way, if I call it that, the less they will be neglected, because then we are going to start to be concerned about ourselves. And that, of course, is related to what is going on in the global health debate right now, where through the experience with COVID-19, the equity challenge has come into the center and into the fore. And so, of course, the whole context, for example, also in the negotiations on the so-called pandemic agreement, is about access and benefits, and that, of course, also includes a research and innovation dimension. And as one discusses these access and benefits, one, of course, starts to talk also about the mechanisms available that, the colleagues here, I'm sure, will talk more about in terms of what Europe has in terms of a global approach to research and innovation, how that might need to be revisited with a greater focus on fairness, and that also, of course, applies to Horizon Europe. I think there's two different approaches here also in the global environment. One is, of course, how we work with so-called developing countries, and that we move away from a donor to an investment model and a cooperation model. The Africa CDC has said, I forget the exact period, I think within the next 5 years, they want to create a 50 billion health industry in Africa. They want to be independent. They want to do their research. But I think in relation to innovation and research, what we also have to look at is regulation. And that is expertise in regulation, which, for example, is something the European Union could do a lot. Look at the recent monkeypox situation. There were no regulators in the countries concerned, and therefore the vaccine got to the people much later because one had to wait for WHO to act accordingly. So there's that whole new way of working with developing countries, new kind of research cooperation, innovation hubs, public-private partnerships, all of that's going on, Biotech, that whole area. But you mentioned security. There's also trade and competition. And with the middle-income countries, and again, we saw that during the pandemic negotiations, we are increasingly moving as research and innovation become part of geopolitics to ever more competition. And of course, here also the whole issue of not only sharing research and innovation and all of that, but literally sharing data to be able, as a public good, health data as a public good is becoming more and more difficult and was also a key issue around the pandemic negotiations. Last point, of course, there are really exciting initiatives that try to move the agenda forward. I'm thinking of CEPI, for example, the Coalition on Epidemic Preparedness Innovation, where Europe is, of course, also contributing. And we see how they are pushing the agenda. In terms, though, of what is being done, we also see a shift, actually two shifts in this neglected diseases research, if I just call it that. One is that the planetary and the environmental and the One Health dimension is becoming much, much stronger. And I think we have to take that up. And the other, that one is moving from looking only at treatment and vaccines. You mentioned it in one of your sentences, is diagnostics. We have really, really neglected research on diagnostics. And we're seeing that in our part of the world because most of our general practitioners wouldn't recognize a neglected disease because they've had no experience with it. So diagnostics becomes even more important. I'll leave it at that right now.
Thanks so much, Ilona. You brought us into the very broad perspective. I'll go very quickly to Joëlle Tanguy, and she's the Director of External Affairs at the Drugs for Neglected Disease Initiative. May I say the main or the biggest non-for-profit developer of products in this area, right? But you can tell us more.
Let's say in the area of neglected tropical disease in particular, but neglected disease in general, yes. So thank you, Rosa. I think you did a terrific job at introducing the issue of the moment, the really critical moment. And if you want to think of moments, I would say 20 years ago, today, and then the next 20 years. And we don't know much about what's next, but we're here to prepare it with you. So 20 years ago, we identified what we call the fatal imbalance, whereby only 1% of innovations were actually meeting the needs of diseases that represented 12% of the disease burden. And at that time, the EU policymakers kind of started to establish instruments that allowed the research resources of the EU and the member states as well, started investing into this area. I think we've really shown that with, for example, with product development partnerships, we are able to move the needles, to produce 182 products in just this period, to build a pipeline for neglected diseases. And so there's a sense of optimism and sense of, yes, we can. But at the same time, there is a little bit of frustration with the current mechanisms and also with the lack of understanding often of how important this issue is for Europe. I would say, for example, that in the last 20 years, we didn't just do really reignite drug development for neglected diseases. We also lived through what? I'm going to simplify the list. H1N1, Ebola, COVID, now the rise of dengue. the emergence of mpox, at least in Africa at the moment. I think you're all aware of that, and but I think we're not translating this into a real articulated understanding of our interdependency and of the danger of underinvesting in these neglected disease. I give you an example. I was really surprised that dengue was mentioned this morning, because dengue hasn't been mentioned in the last 20 years. Dengue has received zero investment in drug development. There is no treatment of dengue. The hospitals of Sri Lanka are completely overloaded with patients because the only possible way to address a dengue patient is actually to manage the fever in the hospital, whereas you could have a pill and really get rid of the side effects of the fever very easily in the communities, in the families, like you have with most diseases. And suddenly we are kind of realizing, oh, dengue is a problem. And I think in Europe, it's very interesting because dengue was a neglected tropical disease. It was endemic in 100 countries before we woke up. It's now on HERA's watch list, and it's also not the only one. I think mpox is the other disease that's making the trajectory from the same journey, actually, from neglected tropical disease to public health threat. So that's something to highlight why this conversation is important. We'll be talking about pool funding. You're looking forward to say that, but I really want to highlight that the European issue, the conversation is essentially about the intertwined aspects of European health security and global development. So looking forward to that chat.
Thank you, Joelle. And I may say I am a bit biased because I come from Venezuela. So I remember the first outbreak of dengue we had. So I'll never forget about it. I know we have like a kind of countdown here like in the parliament, but don't worry, we'll make time for your opening statements. So I have next to me Olivier Jankovic, and I'm sorry about the bad pronunciation, Olivier, but bear with me. You are from a biotech in the EU, very active here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Thanks for DSW for organizing this, and Gastein European Health Forum for having this session. And indeed, I represent Valneva, European vaccine specialty company. And biotech companies have since long been instrumental part, key contributors of progress in medicines. And I think that our sector should also be contributing to neglected diseases. But to make this possible, I think it really takes a true public-private partnership. And for me, this encompasses all phases, from financial support throughout the R&D cycle, regulatory support throughout the development to approval, and commercial support if market and public health goals don't match. At Valneva, we have a broad pipeline of vaccines, including the world's first vaccine against chikungunya, which was approved in the US last year and in Europe this year. For making access to LMIC, we've partnered with Instituto Butantan in Brazil to transfer the technology and produce it locally. And this was done thanks to support also from CEPI and the European Union. And then chikungunya was on the list of tropical disease by FDA that was eventually awarded a PRV. So being the first company, we got this PRV and were able to monetize this. And finally, we did get quite some regulatory support, both in the US and in Europe. In Europe through the PRIME designation, priority medicine, from EMA. And the process was also conducted as an open initiative. So EMA invited WHO and Anvisa of Brazil to join the proceedings. So I think with chikungunya, we've got quite a lot of boxes that we could tick. And from that experience, we learned, and I'm happy to contribute on more opportunities also in Europe to improve this for future developments.
Thanks so much, Olivier. And last but not least, we will hear from Maria. So we are very happy to have you here, Maria Danielle Lueiro. She's working right now at the EU HERA.
Thank you, and thank you so much, Jose, for the introduction. It is clear that the EU has been relying up until now much more on traditional funding mechanisms. So we're talking about grants, really push mechanisms, as Rosa was saying, with the goal of reducing the cost of R&D and innovation for these types of products. However, I think COVID here and monkeypox crisis too was a very interesting and important learning experience for us EU officials, because not only it gave us this perspective of how fast well, that the EU is not isolated, let's say, and how fast something that could be considered initially a global, local threat can turn into a global cross-border threat and a huge issue for the EU. So in that sense, it was enlightening. But also, it really gave us clarity on the importance of maintaining a strong portfolio of available medical countermeasures, and here we're talking vaccines, treatments, diagnostics for a broad spectrum of conditions that can cause a public health threat. Obviously, in order to do so, we need to take into account that for certain types of threats, the MCM, the issue of medical countermeasures, is not only the lack of funding, but the lack of an available market. So we know that for pharmaceutical companies, there is many times not commercial availability to develop specific products for certain illnesses. So here, obviously, the EU can have a role in aligning the interests of the producers with the needs from a public health standpoint. And here is where I think really the pool incentives that we are now taking a look at, and again, thank you for the very good presentation on the study, and that the EU is also taking a look at. This is really something that we are exploring, and in certain instances we already have, I'm going to talk about that later, we already have some programs that we're working on, but not only in guaranteeing a market interest, let's say, for the development of these products, but also on guaranteeing EU competitiveness in these markets, as Ilona was saying. So by using these pool mechanisms, we can, for example, support the placement of innovation in the EU market. We can make it possible to guarantee at least part of the production in the EU landscape, for example. We can guarantee immediate access to the innovation that we are supporting, which is not something that usually you can do with grants. And also, obviously, it creates some competition by allowing several economic operators to work on the same type of innovation at the same time and trying to reach that goal of an incentive. So yes, I think there's definitely a lot that we can do, and I just wanted to leave the message that it's really something that we are exploring already.
Thank you, Maria, and thank you everyone for the opening, which was a bit longer than we expected. So we want to right away go to our first slide of questions to hear from the audience on a very, I think it's a closed question. You probably have it there. You know how it works. The QR code is there, also for our online participants. You don't have an option, as far as I know, to add comments, but you can use the chat. But I pass the floor to Agustin so he can tell us what's happening in the online chat.
Yeah, thank you, Rosa. We got already a few interesting questions, so I'm sure it's going to be an interesting debate in a few minutes. And now you can fill the slide on and let us know, based on this preliminary discussion, what do you think is the biggest challenge, either based on your experience from other fields or from your practical experience in the field of neglected diseases. And we can see that people are already voting.
Okay, that's great. So we can see on the screen what's, I see limited public awareness and political will has a lead here. And may I say that this is one of the reasons we wanted to have a session here in Gastein. So we want to raise that awareness among you. So I hope you can also be amplifiers if you feel convinced by the arguments that our speakers have given to you today. Or if you need any other argument, please come to us after the session, because I'm sure that we're not going to have enough time. So I will jump right away into a few more questions to give you the chance, to give the speakers the chance. I'll have to go, I guess, for one question only per speaker, because we had very good interventions and we want to hear from the audience. So I will start, Ilona, you gave us a really broad overview of, and in your expertise is also on the EU's role in global health. So how do you see the EU contributing to these challenges in neglected disease development right now, but also in the future?
Well, I think what's also been indicated by the other speakers, the development model has been important, but we need to move out of the development model. We need to move out of the development model also because it's an enormous issue of global competition. I've just spent 10 days in China, and I tell you, the competition is harsh, not just in electric cars. And the way, if I just take it as an example, the issue is also the long-term investment that is necessary. I mean, if I look at Chinese universities and the number of African students that are invited by China to study there, that obviously go back and then are the partners of Chinese universities. Now, just after the big meeting that China had with the heads of state of all African countries, who all came, by the way, there is a big initiative of working with African universities, of strengthening African universities. And linked to that is another dimension that, of course, is more and more important for research, and that is the digital development, the AI development, and the research. And I think the issue is really to see how serious this is for European research, for European companies, and for European health. And to really think in a new and I think much bigger way of partnership with developing countries, of being a trusted partner. The negotiations around the pandemic agreement have not helped us being seen as a trusted partner, to be very honest. And you hear the discussions at the UN General Assembly right now and the voices of the so-called Global South. I think there is a lot to do. And I think if Europe gives a focus, a much stronger focus, elements of it are there, I'm not questioning any of that, a much stronger focus on what is called science diplomacy, that is absolutely critical. And maybe the new construct of the Commission, where everyone's responsible for everything, can actually help, pool some of those issues together and take them forward. You cannot separate geopolitical and economic competition from investment in health and health research anymore. It belongs together, and you cannot separate that from the so-called European values. And unless you live those European values, you won't be trusted.
Thank you, Lona. That's a very clear and loud message. Joel, you have, the NDI has specific experiences. You have experienced the drivers maybe that help you, the challenges, but also, I will ask you to maybe combine together maybe a bit with your experience with pool incentives, if you have, and also with the EU as a funder of, has the EU supported you and how?
So briefly, the EU has played an important role in developing not only drugs for neglected disease initiative, but actually all the product development partnerships that have led the transformation in the last couple of years. They have invested through various instruments. I would say the foremost instruments is government overseas development aid and science funding, but also they are instruments at the Commission, and notably the Horizon Research and Innovation Funding, as well as the partnership with Africa, EDCTP. And those have been really drivers. For example, we at the NDI have developed 13 new treatments in 20 years, and for totally neglected diseases. And in the And this was actually an endeavor that cost us 900 million at the end, between 2003 and 2023. Out of 900 million, some 40% came from Europe, member states and EU. And in this case, in fact, EDCTP averaged 4% over the period, but was up to 5 or 7% of our contributions over the kind of in the better years. So that illustrates, at least our vision at the moment is that, okay, there are good instruments at the commissions, but they're mostly push funding for specific science, earlier investments, but they are not adequate to support portfolio management. So I'm going to be very simple. Think of a horse race. So you're putting the races in the horses in the race, and you have money to run the race. And therefore you have a winner, and it comes very quickly, and you know which one is the winner, right? Think of that horse race with a rule whereby you don't have all the money because you're given money for the first stage, which is the first 100 meters, and then you have to stop the race. And then the overall management cost of managing the race still runs on because you can't fire the people. They're very important. You need those scientists to still hang on. But then in the meantime, you wait for 9 months to get a proposal agreed by the European Union. Then you reconvene everybody. You kind of put people in the second 100 meters of the race, and then you have to stop again or whatever. This is the most inefficient mechanism. Pharma does not use that mechanism. It has the different vehicle, but we know that we can't use the private investments because there's no commercial incentive in the kind of products that we are driving, that we're developing. So in brief, this is why we need pool investments. This is maybe an illustration. And my experience with pool investments is several-fold. At the NDI, we've been associated with two PRVs at the US FDA, one very prominently called for fexinizazole, which is a new treatment for a completely neglected disease called sleeping sickness. And thanks to this innovation, which was, by the way, was a new chemical entity, a holy grail of pharmaceutical innovation, and really opened the door to disease elimination. So real transformative. But I was also involved in other innovations that made it to a PRV, like TB drug, and of course we're all well aware at MSF and DNDi of the early kind of more Knights pharmaceutic controversial PRV. But generally speaking, PRVs are very important. Why? Because they are free to society. In other words, you're not paying it. It's very important in Brussels today to think about this. Priority review vouchers work as such a way that basically the people who pay for them are the pharmaceutical industries who want to earn the potential of having their product review accelerated so that they are 4 months ahead of the others, for example, in the market. These 4 months are incredibly valuable. In the best cases we have seen so far, in those 13 PRVs cases, we know that it actually led to earning 500 million to 1.5 billion more for a single pharmaceutical industry in 4 years. That's when you have like a blockbuster and you use this for the blockbuster. So clearly, there's no cost for the European Union. So it would be a very logical process to actually set up this instrument in the current context of constrained fiscal space. The other reason is that they do incentivize pharma collaborations. Pharma walked out, in general, big pharma walked out particularly from drug development because of the lack of commercial incentives. But there are lots of people inside the pharmaceutical companies that are interested in doing good work, and unfortunately, to convince their bosses and their shareholders, they actually have to kind of show that it's contributing to the bottom line, and PRVs end up contributing to the involved pharma bottom line, and that's how it works. I think the last point is they are compatible with the horse race that I was talking about, because they actually provide an opportunity to finance the development with money that's not earmarked, that's not constrained in time. The only problem is that they come at the end of the development and not at the beginning. So there is, of course, a little bit of architecture of financing that needs to happen along the way that will allow bringing forward, maybe with kind of private sector bonds or with other mechanisms, the ability to actually do the financing. So in brief, that's the experience that we had.
Yeah. I mean, your experience cannot be condensed in a few minutes for sure, so feel free to come to Joel for more details. I think we will all take this example of the horse racing, even if we are not into horse racing, but a lot of us have been chasing grants or chasing funding. Olivier, you, from the perspective of a company that recently developed a vaccine against chikungunya, can you tell us a bit more about how does it work with a listed company working on the field of vector-borne diseases? And I'm condensing a little bit the questions I wanted to ask you, because you also mentioned that you have been receiving contributions from the EU Commission, some experience also with the US priority review voucher. How do you compare them in a sense at both sides of the Atlantic, the support that you get?
Thank you, yes. So at Valneva, our vision is to contribute to a world where no one dies or suffers from a vaccine-preventable disease. And in that view, we don't discriminate between the hemispheres, between the North and South. But on the other side, as Joel just said, we are publicly listed company, so we also have other stakeholders, employees and shareholders, and we need to make sure that as a company we strive, and as a loss-making company we find funds to further our other programs. And let's not forget that if we start development in a phase 1, you can expect probably only 1 in 10 projects to succeed. If you move forward through the clinical phases, still in phase 3, probably you have at least 50% chances of failure. So, and inversely, a phase 3 in developing a vaccine costs several hundred millions. So, as a relatively small company, we need to find the funds to support these endeavors. The US PRV that we received was certainly a very interesting mechanism because it was almost instant cash flow. So we were granted the PRV upon FDA approval in November of last year, and were able to sell it early this year, so a couple of months later. And the 100-odd million that we got from this, we were able to now reallocate to both our chikungunya vaccine and other R&D that we're conducting in developing vaccines. But I think for us, a PRV and any pull incentives is not enough. So as I said, we would certainly need a full environment. And I think this was already mentioned, that grant funding as it exists currently in Europe is not really good at supporting development of products. So even if we have a very specific grant and we applied for it and we get it, usually it takes consortia, and then it takes 2 years to finalize the consortia before we can actually start any proper work. In that time, we'd probably done a clinical trial and got the results. So as a biotech company, we need to move fast, and we need to find instruments that support this fast-paced development. And I know that HERA is trying to find new instruments, and they've been supporting CEPI, who's been a good contributor to our development. And we certainly look forward to hearing from HERA. And my personal view, HERA was an excellent addition to the fold in the European space. And I'd certainly like to see HERA given more autonomy and more funding to support, among others, us in the development space.
Thank you, Olivier. And last but not least, Maria. So you started to tell us a little bit of the experience of HERA. And in this precise area, can you tell us a little bit more of what you're doing, especially but I leave it up to you to clarify what you're doing and how it overlaps with global health innovations, with neglected diseases.
So, to give you a little bit of a perspective, in HERA we focus on making sure that the EU can prevent, detect and treat as a response any cross-border threat to health. In particular, we have a focus on 3 priority threats: CBRN, so chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear, antimicrobial resistance, and pathogens with pandemic potential. This is the main priority of HERA. There are already some neglected diseases in the common terminology that fit into these priorities, for example, chikungunya and dengue. But at HERA we also have a discussion on what exactly is a neglected and can be considered a neglected disease. For example, when we look at tuberculosis, where we know that there is not, the market is not very attractive, let's say, and there are specific subsets of the population that are not served enough, let's say. Even in the EU, for example, pediatric populations did not have age-appropriate formulations for treatment up until now, and don't have still, actually. There are really areas that are neglected, let's say, even perhaps not the mainstream sense of the word. And HERA also tries to act on those. Up until now, we were using, as I said before, more traditional tools. So Horizon Europe for more basic research, let's say, EU for Health to support some projects that were perhaps a little bit more closer to market. A very interesting tool, in my opinion, is, for example, HERA Invest, so where we put 100 million at the disposal of small and medium enterprises. HERA was funding up to 50% of development costs, and the 2 key criteria were that this funding was going into medical countermeasures for HERA's priority threats, and that the development was based in the EU. But these are more traditional push tools that we have been using. Now, obviously, we know that because of all the reasons that we were listing here, we need to focus a little bit more also on the pool incentives. And in that area, we have been implementing some key projects, let's say, for example, on the pediatric formulations for tuberculosis. We were procuring innovation research. So what we were doing is we were paying for the clinical and non-clinical research that needs to go into the building of the portfolio that is submitted to EMA for market access. And this was a project that was done actually in consultation with EMA, so they were really helping us build this call for tenders to make sure that we were paying for the exact research that is usually needed, because these products actually already existed outside of the EU, so it was just a matter of bringing them into the EU. And the same, for example, for metagenomic sequencing. So we can pay for the research that is necessary to bring the products to the EU for market access. And for example, in antimicrobial resistance, we have launched earlier this year in March a revenue guarantee project where basically if specific antimicrobials are brought into the EU market, the EU makes a commitment to purchasing X amount of units, whether they are used or not, because obviously for antimicrobials we have all these stewardship rules that sometimes cause a little bit of a market failure. All of this to say, we are trying to build a toolkit of pull mechanisms that we can use in different areas. We're even looking at, for example, demand estimation. So perhaps if we gather with the member states, we can estimate the need for specific products, and this estimation of demand could be enough to, sufficiently attractive to bring pharmaceutical companies to invest in a specific product or to put resources into bringing a specific product to the market. We are looking at these mechanisms. It's definitely something that we think could bring, I'm going to wrap up, could bring a lot of value to the EU, yes.
Thank you, Maria. And this is great news to know that one of the key actors right now, HERA, is doing a lot. And please feel free to, ask the groups present here and the others when you need help and when you need, feedback or input into your work. I would like to very quickly go into the second question of Slido and at the same time just open the floor. So who wants to have any comment, question? Meanwhile that Agustin checks and tell us what is up there, you can raise your hand. I think there are 2 microphones and...
Yes, the next Slido question is, which pool funding mechanism do you believe would be most effective in stimulating R&D for neglected diseases based on the conversation? Please let us know your thoughts. And we have a very lively discussion in the chat. I'm trying to address some of those, but you can also reach to us afterwards. We are happy to take questions. Do you want to open the floor then?
That would be great. If you have any question, keep it there because I see 2 hands. So
yes.
Maybe very quickly because I know we're running out of time, but we want to hear your questions and comment. I think I saw Risha and Boris, right? I mean, there are microphones I heard in the room. So there is first row and then 4th row there, yeah.
Good morning. Lively
yes.
discussion here. Oh, very good content. Richard Bergström from IQVIA was also involved in the COVID-19 response with buying vaccines from companies. And we actually bet on many horses. Back to the horse race, we ended up effectively using only 2, but we had 141 on the list, So we had to bet on everything. Now, I think we can learn a lot from the United States here, and I think you were actually onto that when you were reflecting on your projects in HERA now. I mean, take monkeypox. Yes, it was neglected until it wasn't neglected, to your point, Ilona. Europe was a complete free rider, where the whole world was a free rider on the US. Okay, we can be finger pointing and say, why didn't we do this earlier? But actually, the vaccine we have now, and the only treatment we have, came from the United States. Right? Now, the Commission, and this is not known by many people, actually HERA bought all available doses at the producer of the vaccine in Denmark and said, we buy all you have and donate it to member states. Because the member states, we don't know, do we need this? I don't know how many doses we need, Commission took over, just like they did with the COVID-19 vaccines. So I think, but overall, the experience is that advanced purchase commitments, this is what the US did. Okay, they funded, partly, cash outlays, but they put money on the table. That works. Problem with vouchers is always that they're unpredictable. So, Olivier, now, your company should be credited for taking this forward, and you made some money at the end. But investors, venture capitalists, would not invest in you like that and say, maybe 10 years from now you have a vaccine for this, and then you get a voucher and it could be worth 100 million or half a billion, we don't know. They're not going to fund that. That's why the voucher idea, whether it's for AMR or whether it's a priority review voucher, really is in question. It's really clever milestone payments with shorter turnaround times, but money on the table at the end. That's what works. Because the big investments are towards the end, and you made that analysis, Rosa. The big money is for phase 2, phase 3. And if you know something looks interesting, and you get money on the table, then the markets will be there. Venture capitals will be there at that point, not earlier.
Thank you, Richard. I see that, I don't know if the speakers, anybody wants to have a quick reaction. Very quick, Joel.
I think it's an interesting remark, but I wonder, so we talked about how Mpox and dengue used to be completely neglected. So think now of something that hasn't come yet, but is currently neglected, but has a potential to come our way. Will there be appetite in the European Union to give this guarantee for all those diseases that are making their way here? Is there really the resources for that? Whereas the priority review voucher is not expensive, the advanced market commitment are quite significant. So I support what you're saying, but I think we need to think with that advanced market commitment is like a real holy grail, where you have a real commitment and very significant and with budget implications. But that is interesting that a risk-taking industry is willing to go only the way of really secure financing as opposed to also a modicum of risk associated, indeed, as you said, with the PRV.
Thank you. Thank you, Jen. So we had another question. I don't know if there are other hands around. I'm trying to see, but okay, we have a third one. So please do quick.
Yes, Boris Azais from MSD. Thanks a lot for this great panel. I think you're missing one of the pool funding mechanism, which was discussed, more than 20 years ago. We were discussing it with the Research and Innovation Directorate, which was the transferable IP right, TIPR. It's you have to be old to remember that. But so you're missing one in your quiz. I was wondering, Olivia, I had a question for you, but it's also for HERA. I mean, what has been your experience with priority review vouchers in terms of scale, and how would they translate in Europe? I mean, this has been discussed for years and pushed back. I mean, basically, the basic pushback for a review voucher is coming from regulatory authorities. It's not totally cheap or zero cost. It's because the regulators will say, well, I need more resources to review other products, and also they don't like anything to mess with their own process, which is complicated enough. So how would that translate? And also to Richard's point, I think all these pull mechanisms or purchase commitments and so forth, revenue guarantees, they need to be reviewed whether they have the right scale. Scale is the issue. So the voucher, I mean, if something doesn't work, it's because it doesn't have the right scale. And the pharmaceutical companies, they don't operate on guarantees. I'm sorry, I mean, the business of a pharmaceutical company is complete risk. It's 99% risk of failure. But so we don't operate on guarantees. Okay. But there needs to be the hope of something at the end.
Okay, thanks, Boris. That's the very interesting, I think, points. I mean, if I may, unless somebody wants to jump and have a quick, I can answer to you, and we can definitely discuss, because in our pool incentive studies, which is over 40 pages, but the good news, we have a short version too. We look into these pool incentives. There are issues, and I think similarly to what Joel said, I mean, this is quite a different market for neglected disease products. So for many of these, even the people that say advanced market commitments might be a good idea. Yes, but think that most of these products, the EU will need to do this pool incentive, and the majority of the products will go to other countries, to LMICs. So it's quite a different environment. So with IP rights, we look into them, you will look into orphan drug designation, and I'm happy to discuss. On the priority review voucher and the regulatory issue that you say, that's a quite important point. That's why the proposal that DSW developed for the EU includes a user fee that should be able to cover the additional cost of the regulator to go into this. But we are happy to discuss. This is why we are happy to have you here today. I think we have to wrap up. Do you want to say something, Agustin, about the Slido? I don't know if we have 2 minutes for the speakers also to give 20-second closing if they want.
Yeah, I think we have some interesting questions. Some of those were covered about the PRB to some of the panelists, or the PDP model, whether the EU should not support more that, because that's been really the most successful model for incentivizing neglected disease R&D. Probably you would agree. And also a question to Ilona on the Chinese partnership with African universities, and whether this could not really spur the EU into action, seeing that kind of country outcompeting us in global health, while the EU has traditionally been very a proud actor in global health and leading the agenda, whether some competition from China would not be beneficial. I don't know if you can incorporate those questions on your final remarks.
So unless I see a sign, I will give you the floor for but really like 20 seconds or 30 seconds reactions final. And well, I love to be here with all of you today, and this was the reason why we're here. We will need another session, I think, on the geopolitical side in China. I don't want to put Ilona on the spot. We need another one to discuss that. But Ilona, please, any wrapping up
No,
comments?
just as a wrap up to, first of all, to think long term and to be ready. Because look at the discussions right now at the G20 with the Brazilian presidency. Look at their concept of the health industrial complex and how you can combine profit and public good. Really important what they are trying to push forward, and that will have consequences in the European Union. Think of the fact that the next G20 is going to be South Africa. And that's going to be highly controversial in relation to medical goods and everything that comes with it. And that means we have to be more, as Europeans, much more prepared to see all this development in this larger equity and geopolitical context and have an answer for that and be a credible partner that can really help move the agenda ahead. I really think we have to be very, very political about these issues.
Thank you. Joelle, the same. Few words also like to wrap up.
It's hard to conclude this. I feel like we want to continue. But yes, I would say that the progress that we've done for the last 20 years was actually a combination of good well-understood self-interest to develop an ecosystem of science in Europe and support it, with a vision of the SDGs where we drive equity, we support the health agenda. I think what Ilona is hinting to is the importance of the new vision framework that will drive us. And if we are only looking at, okay, which disease is coming into Europe now, and where are the threats now, and trying to have a patchwork of solutions that are short-term, we probably are not going to win the big stakes that she's referring to, which is a combination of self-interest, well-placed self-interest, of having a strong science ecosystem in Europe and a strong, healthy community in Europe, together with the place of Europe in the global ecosystem, a new, completely changed relationship in the science with low and middle-income countries. And to say, maybe the concluding word is, for me, the 13 treatments that we've developed, they were not developed alone. They were developed with European scientists, but not European scientists alone. The AI expert that will accelerate your discovery agenda will, with machine learning or proteomics or whatever, is actually not important, but he might be seated here, he might be seated elsewhere, but fundamentally he, or I should say she, has to work with the scientists in Africa, in Latin America and in Asia, who are really the disease experts of tomorrow's European health threats. So, food for thought.
Thanks so much. And Olivier, Maria.
Thank you. I think this shouldn't be a conclusion, this should be the opening. And at Valneva, we're really looking forward to both continuing our work in developing new vaccines against neglected diseases and others, but also this dialogue with the people here on the panel and everybody listening in the room and online to find new ways to revive and continue to invest into R&D against vaccines and other medicines in Europe. Thank you.
Thank you, Olivier and Maria.
Yeah, I think I could not agree more with what has been said. I think overall the message that I take from this panel is really the need to diversify investment tools. So not only basic research, not only the carrot at the end of advanced purchase agreements, but really to diversify throughout the pipeline the investment that we make. And this is the only way to tackle these sort of threats of tomorrow, these high risk, high reward threats, where we know that medical countermeasure availability still does not exist. And perhaps, I think here, as Ilona was saying, this comes even before drug development. Perhaps it's also this science diplomacy that we need to invest also more on. So overall, diversification of investment mechanisms for me is really the take-home message.
Thank you, Maria. That's a great message to finish. And I really encourage you all to read our study or the short version and to continue the conversation on this, because this is an issue that will definitely touch us all in some way in the future, but it usually touches the most vulnerable. So I think, many of the diseases threatening the EU also are unfortunately going to be harder also in certain groups, patients living with chronic diseases, children, the elderly, and we should all care. So thank you so much for being here so early in the morning. And big applause for our speakers. Thank you for coming here.